everybody. Welcome to the latest Fine Homebuilding webinar on protecting houses from severe weather with the Fortified Construction Method. I'm Rob Watzak from Fine Homebuilding. I want to thank Zip System Roof Assembly for sponsoring today's webinar. Zip System Roof Assembly combines an integrated sheathing and flashing tape or liquid flashing to protect against moisture intrusion during construction or if high winds strip roof coverings away. Now, I just want to tell you a little bit about our presentation before we get started. For those who don't already know, Fortified Home is a research-backed construction method engineered to strengthen building structures and envelopes to better withstand extreme weather. We've invited Fortified Managing Director Fred Malik to introduce the full suite of construction standards and explain how to implement them. Welcome, Fred.
Hey, Rob, how you doing? Good to see you.
Thanks, you too. And at the end of Fred's presentation today, we have a bonus. We have the Q&A, and to help with our Q&A after the presentation, we've also invited someone who has firsthand experience incorporating fortified construction methods, and that's Will King, owner of design build firm High Cotton Homes. Welcome, Will.
Hey, thanks for having me, Rob. I look forward to it.
Great. So looks like we've got a good crowd of people here already, and Will and I are going to drop out for a little bit while Fred gives his presentation, and we'll be back shortly for the question and answer session. Take it away, Fred.
All right. Thanks, guys. Look forward to seeing you here at the tail end there. All right. Welcome, everybody. Glad that you're here to learn a little bit about Fortified, and want to walk you through our agenda today. We're going to start off by talking a little bit about why does IBHS, the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety, why did we create the Fortified standard, and what's the motivating factor there? Then we're going to talk a little bit about the research behind the standard. Why, when we say it's research-based, what's the significance of that, and what have we learned that's maybe a little bit different than what you're used to? We're going to talk about the 3 tiers of Fortified, the roof, silver, and gold levels. I'll show you some real-world examples of houses that were, as recently as last week, were being fortified. And then we'll wrap up before we go to questions, talking a little bit about how you can incorporate Fortified into your projects, in particular, the Fortified roof process. So this is a slide that really defines the why. Why does IBHS and why does Fortified exist? Well, this is a chart that shows the impact of insured losses caused by natural disasters in the United States. You can see here that in the last 10, 11 years or so, there's been a pretty significant upward trend in the volume of severe weather. And as more severe weather occurs, there are more losses associated with it. When we talk about losses, think about it this way. It's not just dollars and cents to insurance companies or other stakeholders. Each of those losses represents a family, a business, a school, that was disrupted and impacted by that disaster. And as you can see over here in the last year we have in this chart, the amount of losses, the dollar volume of losses is just getting to be untenable. I mean, $450 billion in 2020 alone. So that's the why we exist. Let me tell you a little bit more about IBHS. IBHS is a nonprofit organization. We are funded by property insurers and reinsurers. They pay dues into our organization, and our sole reason for being is to find ways to reduce or eliminate property loss and avoidable financial loss for homeowners and insurance companies. We have been at this for over 3 decades, and in 2010 we introduced or brought online our research center. That's what you can see behind me and what you can see in the background here. Its primary feature is this giant wind tunnel, and adjacent to that is a hangar, an airplane hangar sized building where we can build full scale structures and put them through their paces, particularly when it comes to wind driven rain, hail, and wildfire. One of the other features that you'll notice is this roof farm in the foreground. That's so we can, over time, this is a 20-year experiment, but over time we can evaluate the impacts of weathering on different kinds of roof cover materials. So let me give you just a brief video tour of our capabilities, both in the field and in the research center. So the video is flying you through our wind tunnel here up to our wind array. There's 105 fans, 350 horsepower apiece. We can create category 3 storms indoors. But we start by collecting data in the field. So we go out, we figure out, how big is average hailstone? How hard is it? We look at amber showers and figure out what do we need to do to be able to recreate that in the laboratory environment. And then we come back and we actually do that. We build full-size structures and we create these realistic scenarios, including wind-driven rain. And what we accomplish in the lab looks an awful lot like what we see out in the field. We can test things like block construction. This is a commercial building. And ultimately, we are looking for ways to prevent catastrophic failure. We want to be able to bring people home faster and help them recover sooner. So it is a cool place to work. I've been a builder for nearly 30 years, and being able to go to work at a place like this and figure out, how to build stuff, blow it apart, and then rebuild it so it doesn't happen again is pretty neat. One of the things that we have learned from our decades of research is that there is a very repetitive pattern of damage when it comes particularly to high wind. The pattern is determined by how intense are the winds and then how long do they last. And that doesn't matter whether we're talking about hurricanes, severe thunderstorms, derechos, or severe convective storms, otherwise known as tornadoes. The pattern is always the same. So the pattern starts with roof cover loss. Then as the winds become more intense and last a little bit longer, wall covers start to fail. So siding, things like that. Then roof sheathing and the roof structure. Once that envelope is penetrated, either through the roof or through an opening, that's when we ultimately see catastrophic failures and total collapse. And it's usually around this point in the presentation where I get somebody in the audience who lives in some place like Minnesota or Wisconsin or Kentucky and Oklahoma and says, this is really a hurricane kind of thing. Well, it's not. The wind affects the entire United States, and what you're seeing now is a satellite time lapse that shows 2 or 3 very bad days back in 2017 where there was significant wind and weather that just crawled across the United States, leaving a path of destruction across a majority of the Great Plains and Midwest. And so, if you're here and you're watching this video, I hope that you'll understand that this does apply wherever you are and wherever you build. And then finally, we'll just wrap up this little section by talking about how the trend line is, again, upward sloped when it comes to severe convective storms. Those are tornadoes, and particularly these are occurring inland. And now that we have populations that are growing in population centers that are more frequently in the way of this severe weather, the losses are starting to pile up. So let's take a look at what that progression of damage looks like from start to finish. So the start of damage starts just like this. The roof cover begins to fail. Once the cover starts to come off, then the underlayment, which is code compliant and typically is only superficially tacked in place, it starts to go. These are at relatively low wind speeds. They can start to occur well below 100 miles an hour. And this is about what you see at EF0. You start to see wall cover, siding damage. Then EF1 winds, the wind begins to increase, and now you're seeing things like garage doors, very common mode of failure, particularly inland and away from the coast. Garage doors are notoriously weak and unreinforced, and they represent a large opening in the building, which can then lead to a phenomenon called internal pressurization when the wind gets in, and that's when you start to see stuff like this happening. Hopefully my internet connection is not going bad. We've got a storm that's going pretty good outside. So EF2 damage is wall and structural failures. And now we're at EF3 on the scale. And remember, the EF scale goes all the way up to 5. At EF3, we start to see either small pieces of the roof structure come off, or we can have catastrophic full-scale failures just like the ones you're seeing now. So, once that roof starts to fail, it is one of the things that constrains the perimeter walls, and that's why we start to see significant wall failures, and you see nothing but piles of debris once this starts to happen. And it's a bad day when your neighbor's house is sliding across the ground on its way to your front door. So we can do something about that, though. We can, these houses that you've seen here are all built to mimic standard building code practices. So they are all connected to a foundation. The foundation is connected to the ground. The wall plates are connected to the floor. The floor is connected to the foundation. So just like we would have it as built in the field, the failures that you're seeing are realistic. They are not artificially weak at because of where they're built. And this is what typically the losses look like at scale. This is a tornado track. You can see the devastation up here, which is, complete and total. It's difficult to mitigate these kinds of losses altogether. But what we can do is we can have a significant impact on all of these houses that are on the perimeter and these up here that are on the perimeter. So Fortified is designed to narrow the path of damage, whether it's a tornado or a hurricane. And it can work. It's been demonstrated to work. This is a home that was in amongst a number of homes. You can look around here where there are all kinds of blue tarps and roof cover failures. Here's a complete roof structural failure here and here. And here's a fortified house right in the middle. Experienced all the same pressures and issues that the neighbors experienced. But because of the enhancements that were included here, this habitat house survived. All right, so we've covered the why. We've covered the research that we're capable of doing both in the field and in the research center. And you may be asking yourself, well, why not just participate in the code conversation, and why do you need a standard like Fortified? Well, the building codes process, we're actively involved and we support it. We love strong building codes and we love reasonable building codes. But frankly, the science and the knowledge base is accelerating, and we're learning more and more. We know more, and we felt like there was a need and an opportunity to get this information out faster. So while we participate in the codes, we also developed the standard, which is called Fortified. And we have now 3 versions of the standard. We have Fortified Home, which is primarily for single family detached. We have Fortified Commercial, which is generally going to be for light commercial uses, not so much for heavy manufacturing or ports or anything like that, but light commercial uses, office buildings, things like that. And then last year we released multifamily. Multifamily builds on the success of the Fortified Home program, and we use that multifamily to strengthen high occupancy uses like apartments, condominiums, dormitories, things like that. Now, we might be asking yourselves, well, okay, I get it. There's science, there's research. What actually is Fortified? Well, Fortified is a set of voluntary standards that are put together in our Fortified manual, and contractors, builders, homeowners, roofing contractors can choose to participate in the Fortified program. Part of the program, and on top of the science and the research, is a verification and validation process. So projects are documented. That documentation is submitted to IBHS, and IBHS then issues a certificate, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And that certificate can unlock incentives or prove that a home is built different than its neighbors. The standard is geographically appropriate. So we have a hurricane version of the standard for the coast, And we have an inland version of the standard for places that are away from the coast, in places like where Will is in Florence, Alabama, or some other folks may be. And there are 3 levels of durability, and I'll get into why we have 3 levels, but there's 3: roof, silver, and gold. Each one builds on the levels before to gradually increase the resilience of the structure. Each of the levels I just mentioned builds on the ones below, and what we did that intentionally so that we could, 1, make fortified available to folks that live in existing structures. So if you're re-roofing or significantly retrofitting a home, you can incorporate fortified, as well as build new. And we wanted to be able to make some form of resilience affordable at any price point. And now there are nearly 50,000 homeowners that are enjoying the peace of mind of fortified homes in 26 states. Now, when it comes to determining where you would use each version of the standard, either high wind or hurricane, we basically follow the wind maps that are available through ASCE 7. And if you don't have this tool bookmarked and you're a builder, you should probably do that. This little tool right here is awesome. It's free. It's from the American Society of Civil Engineers. You can plug in a little bit of data about where your project is located, and it will plot that, and it will tell you what is the design wind speed supposed to be for your home. And when you look at a zoomed out version of that map, you can see all these contours here that come into play. And so it's no secret why our map of where we apply the standard, which standard closely resembles that. This is about where the hurricane line is, and this is about at 115 miles an hour. So if you are seaward 115, you are going to be hurricane. If you are inland of the 115 line, you're going to be high wind. And if you happen to be in one of these areas that's covered by this purple hash mark, you have a significant history of damaging hail, and we would encourage people to use our high wind and hail version of the standard, which basically includes impact rated roof coverings. So let's talk a little bit about what's in each level before, and then I'll give you a deeper dive into fortified roof in particular, because you may be interested in trying to incorporate fortified roof in your next project. So fortified roof is our entry level. Every home that carries a fortified designation has a fortified roof. Why? Because the roof, as you saw in the progression of damage, the roof is the first thing to fail. And a lot of times, the losses that are felt by the homeowner are going to far exceed the amount of damage that's actually to the roof cover. And the reason for that is water. Water gets in through the damaged roof cover when it can get to the exposed roof deck. And once that water gets inside the house, the damage starts to really amplify. And I'm going to give you an example of that here in a second. So we start with the roof, make sure that everything from the trusses to the roof decking sitting on top of the trusses, to the layer of underlayment covering the roof decking, to the edges where we have edge metal and starter shingles in particular, make sure all that stuff is designed to stay on and is attached appropriately. And then we also confirm that the roof cover, it has an appropriate wind rating. If it's a roof cover like metal or tile or even a low slope cover, those covers have a different way of assessing whether they are appropriately rated or not. They use design pressure ratings and specific fastening patterns to achieve those design pressure ratings. And we look at all of that. So roof is the first level. Once you have fortified roof, then you can start thinking about silver. Silver is where we try to reduce damage amplifiers. So remember, we're trying to keep the openings intact so that the air and the wind can't get in. We've dealt with the roof deck at the roof level. Now we're keeping windows and doors intact. Now, if you're at the coast, if you're in the hurricane area, you're protecting all windows and doors and garage doors. If you are inland, so if you're away from the coast, your primary focus is going to be on the garage door. And you saw why. That house that had the garage door fail, That was a typical inland home facing typical inland types of winds during a severe convective storm. And the pressure applied to that door, not no debris hitting it, the pressure was enough to cause it to fail. And that's a real challenge. I started building houses up in Virginia. And in Virginia, we didn't pay a whole lot of attention to design pressure ratings for garage doors. I really just paid attention to what size is it, what color is it, and when do I need it? And I think most builders who aren't building at the coast probably did the same thing. There isn't a lot of labeling on doors, so there's a lot of opportunity to increase our knowledge when it comes to garage doors. But once you've met silver, now we can go all the way to gold. Gold has the roof, it has the openings and the building envelope protected. And now we're focusing on something called the continuous load path. The continuous load path is a set of connections that connects the roof to the walls to the floor to the foundation. That load path in a lot of the coastal markets is engineered. In a lot of inland markets, you use other tools like the wood frame construction manual or some of the prescriptive methods defined in the code. It's not as common to have a structural engineer involved in design, and that's a real challenge when it comes to getting a comprehensive load path capable of withstanding the loads. But either way, we are going to be looking to make sure that there's a load path that has been called out and that a load path has been installed. But let's go back to talking about the roof. We're going to get into some specifics here. And the reason is the roof is the biggest loss driver when it comes to storms. And one of the most vulnerable types of roof covering is asphalt shingles. Asphalt shingles are on 3 out of every 4 homes in the United States. And this particular cover has some limitations with it and is particularly vulnerable to aging. So how do we fortify our roof? Well, we start by nailing it down. And nailing it down, we're talking about securing the roof deck to the rafters or trusses. In Fortified, we require you to use 8D ring shank nails. And if you're on the coast, they're 4 inches on center. And if you're inland, they're 6 inches on center. Pretty simple. Try to keep it easy. Just do that across the entire deck, and you're going to be in good shape. The second step is to seal it up. That's where we use products like the zip system or tape and synthetic underlayment or fully adhered membranes or 2 layers of 30-pound felt. We have 4 different methods from the top side that you can choose from depending on your roof cover and your location and also the price point. But you have to put on a system that falls into the sealed roof deck system group on it from Fortified to keep that water out, because what we're anticipating is that the roof cover is going to fail. The last thing the last major step in roof is called locking it in. And that's where we're really looking at the edges here. When wind interacts with a building, the worst pressures, the highest pressures that cause failures are going to be at the edges, around the perimeter and up at the ridge. So we're looking for things like edge metal, and we have some details for making sure, particularly if you have a siding, a shingle roof, getting the shingles to adhere and stick to the roof below so that they are less likely to begin failing there at the edge. So let's look at a real life project. What does this look like in real life? Well, this is a house that was just had a fortified roof put on last week in the Charlotte, North Carolina area. You'll see that the roof deck is being, they strip off the old cover, they re-nailed the entire deck, and then they start to apply the tape here. Now you'll notice that tapes, particularly things like zip tape, can be used on commodity regular OSB or plywood. It's an acrylic tape, it sticks really well. There's a lot of tapes that can perform this function. This just happens to be a popular one in that market. Now, what you're seeing here is a combination of things that this particular homeowner and their roofer decided to put together based on this homeowner's particular desires. But they opted to put a row of peel and stick at the eaves and in the valleys to help with flashing and the potential for ice damming. We don't necessarily require that in fortified, but we do allow systems to be combined like this to be able to get to the end result. And then back from the edge, they started with the synthetic underlayment. Now, when it comes to synthetic underlayment, in particular, this has become a very popular underlayment, and it can be super durable as long as it's not being hand tacked or sparsely nailed. And if you look here, you can get a flavor for how many nails need to be in this. This is 6 inches on center at the laps, and then 12 inches on center in the field. And this particular roll was 4 feet wide. So you had to have 3 rows of fasteners in between the laps. And we use button cap nails so that the material cannot be pulled over, at least not as easily, if it becomes exposed. And you can also see here the edge metal that is being installed, and you see how it's nailed off. Now you can start to see that you can see a little bit better the fastening of the underlayment, and you can start to see the starter shingles going down. We do require the use of starter shingles because you can see that leading edge of sealant there, which catches that first course of shingles and really keeps it locked down tight. And you may also notice over here that in this particular job, they chose to use mastic here to help seal the shingles down to the drip edge and the underlayment. You don't have to use mastic. We also have an approach that uses a peel and stick starter strip, those are becoming much more popular and available. But this combination of roofer and homeowner opted to go this route. There's just another picture of the mastic going down and the drip edge being nailed off going up the eave here. So that's what it takes to get all of the systems that will be covered by the primary cover ready for fortified. And by the way, all these pictures that we're showing you, we had the luxury on this particular job of having a drone, but the pictures that we're showing you are the ones that are collected as part of the documentation file and can be taken by a roofer on the roof, can be taken by an evaluator, that the third-party evaluator that people are required to work with. But in this case, we were able to get the documentation using the drone during each layer of installation. And then there's the finished product. And what this, I hope, underscores is that once the roof cover goes on, you have no way of knowing whether or not it's a fortified roof or a standard roof. The only way you'll really know is if you have a certificate from IBHS. And that's where the value of participating in the program and getting the certificate starts to be added for builders and roofers so they can provide that proof of compliance to their customers. Now, what are we trying to do? And this is the type of loss that we're trying to minimize, right? So this is, sorry, let me go back here to this one. This is an example of a roof cover failure with no sealed roof deck. And look at the value of the loss. The damage from the top side doesn't look like it's all that much different, but the loss is 3 times as high on the unsealed side. So this is the way we typically build. $17,000 loss versus a $5,000 loss. And that does not include what we call ALE, which is alternate living expenses. That's what people have to pay when they are forced out and can't live in their home while it's being repaired. So that one simple thing, fortified roof, can make a gigantic difference. So let's talk a little bit about what the process looks like. You may be asking yourself, hopefully I've done my job and you're all excited. You're like, okay, I'm ready. What do I need to do? So the process can be initiated by either the homeowner and their roofer, if they're re-roofing, or a builder, if you're building new. And the process typically will start by either the homeowner or the builder contacting a fortified evaluator. The fortified evaluator then becomes part of the team and works with all of the contractors that are involved that have responsibility for fortified systems that need to be upgraded. And they begin to communicate with the project manager and schedule site visits. This process is designed to not be disruptive. We don't typically have situations where people are significantly delayed in their critical path, as long as there's good communication and there's good scheduling. So once the work starts, whether it's re-roofing or it's building new, the evaluator will come out on site, collect documentation. There is an opportunity for roofers to participate in the documentation process so that nobody has to pay for an evaluator to be on the job for 8 hours while it's being torn off and re-roofed in one day. But there has to be really good communication, and roofers should go through the fortified roof training so they know what kind of documentation is going to be required of them. Once the work is done and the evaluator has a complete file, they then submit it to IBHS. I have a team of building professionals who reviews every single file and all the documentation, and we, IBHS, make the final determination about whether or not that project meets the fortified requirements, and then we issue a certificate. Certificates will look like this. There'll be an address, a designation date, and then an expiration date. The certificates are good for 5 years. We limit the lifespan of the certificates because, as I mentioned, the roof covers age and they deteriorate over time. So every 5 years, we want to get out there and see, have there been any changes to the building? Did somebody add solar panels? Did they have a silver home? Did they cut holes in the door for a doggy door? Is there any obvious signs of damage and repair? And is the roof cover still in good shape? If all of those things are positive, then meaning green, if they're in good shape, then we will reissue a certificate for another 5 years. And all of our certificates also feature a QR code over here or in the lower right-hand corner. And those QR codes can be used to confirm that a certificate is valid. This certificate is what can unlock things like insurance incentives. It can be used as part of the proof of sale when you're selling from one homeowner to another, that your home has a different set of features than another home that you may be considering. There's a lot of opportunity here. This is also what is being used in a lot of places to verify compliance with grant programs. And we'll talk a little bit about those, and I'm sure I'll get some questions on those. So you may be asking yourself, what does it cost? These costs are a pretty broad range, and they have gone up over time, particularly with inflation. It used to cost around $500 to $750 to $1,500 to comply on a re-roof job. Now it's more along the lines of $1,000 to $3,000, but that does depend a lot on which sealed roof deck technique you're choosing and how big the roof is. This is based on basically a 2,200 or 2,200 square foot or 22 square roof. If you're building new, there are lots of places where the building code is on a good path and getting close to fortified, like in Florida. So you may not have a significant increase in base cost and your hard costs at all. If you're some places like really rural Mississippi or Kentucky, you may have as much as a 3% increase in your hard cost if you're going all the way to gold. So you're incorporating a load path and things like that. There's also evaluation fees that are on top of that. Now, IBHS does not set those fees. The evaluators that have been trained set their own fees, but typically those fees, depending on the type of project we're talking about, whether it's re-roofing or new, will involve a couple of site visits, and they get paid for their time. So, and it typically will work out somewhere in the range of a normal home inspection for a real estate transaction. That's a good place to start. And then if it's more complex, if there's a lot of travel time, that can drive the prices and help to determine where the price ends up. But the evaluators, homeowners and builders are free to negotiate with the evaluators to arrive at their best cost. Now, as I come into the tail end of my presentation here, and before we open up for questions, I know I got to hustle. I just want to give you some proof points. Does it actually work in the field? So since 2018, nearly 90% of our 45,000 plus, now almost 50,000 homes have seen at least one landfalling storm. In 2020, that was Hurricane Sally. We had 18,000 fortified homes in the path of that storm. And afterwards, fewer than 1% of those homes reported losses related to the fortified systems that were mitigated. We have this home here. This is one of several homes in coastal Louisiana where Hurricane Ida came ashore very close to where this home is built. And you can see this was a brand new home, just about ready to be occupied by the new owners. And just behind it, you can see the complete failure of this house. Another example, these are townhouses here, also in Lockport, Louisiana, Hurricane Ida. This is 2 weeks prior to the storm. Here comes Hurricane Ida, and the eye goes directly over the job site. This is what it looks like afterwards. All the buildings are in good shape. We have one that lost a little bit of siding on the gable end right here. And here you can see the actual performance compared to something just a quarter mile away. So here's brand new fortified construction. Here, a quarter mile away, is townhouses built by the exact same general contractor, by the way, that did not fare quite as well. I also want to share just a direct testimonial from a gentleman named Paul Jackson. Paul had a house located in Mexico Beach, Florida. Category 4 storm, Hurricane Michael, went directly over his house, and he had a fortified home. And let me let him tell you how he made out.
We did really well compared. You know, the water damage in itself is a hassle, but relatively speaking, if you walk up and down the road out there, you'll see that people that didn't do fortified, they've got a lot more work to do, and in some cases, the structure completely gone. You can see where parts of the roof are blown off, parts of decks were blown off, a bunch of, you know, odds and ends that, you know, I hate to say it, but if they'd have been fortified, they'd have the same roof I did, which is in perfect shape.
So Paul and his family had to evacuate for a total of 6 hours. When we went back and talked to him to fill in that testimonial 11 months later, neither neighbor on either side was back in their house. Their homes were still completely gutted. So here's 3 primary benefits for property owners. That's always a common question. Less disruption and financial loss is what we're after, but we understand that financial incentives make a big difference. So bullets 2 and 3 apply to that. If you have a better risk, meaning you have a home that's less likely to be damaged, there are typically going to be more insurers that are willing to insure that property. And then another opportunity is to take advantage of incentives that are available. There are 5 states currently where fortified incentives are expressly written into state law or regulation. That's Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Oklahoma, and North Carolina. And there are more states coming online and more carriers coming online all the time. Here's an example of some incentives that may be available. So we chose Alabama here because that's where Will's at. Down on coastal Alabama, you can save as much as, that's the example over here on the left, you can save as much as 55% on your wind premium on the coast. And up where Will's at, you have a fortified gold home, you can save as much as 30% on your wind premium. If you're interested in learning more, on our website at fortifiedhome.org, we have a whole set of incentive sheets for the different states that I mentioned. Here's a quick testimonial from a builder in Alabama. We built over 2,000 homes that were in the path of Sally, and they didn't have one single callback on those homes. It's a pretty strong testimonial. Here's a roofer. If you want to know whether there's demand or desire for this after Sally, Ben Murphy's roofing company got 800 calls for new business. And that wasn't just because there was a whole kinds of damaged roofs. It's because people knew he put on fortified roofs. And so how do you become a fortified roofer or a fortified building professional? We have training available at www.fortifiedwise.com. There's a free course up there called Fortified Fundamentals that anybody can take. And if you're interested in one of the certifications I mentioned, either roof professional or evaluator, there are courses that you can pay for and take and become certified in those disciplines. And with that, I'll just stop here so that we have plenty of time for questions. And then we'll close it out. So Rob, why don't you come on back?
All right. Well, thank you, Fred. By how quiet people were during the presentation, because usually there's a lot of chatter and questions coming through during a webinar. I think everybody was pretty much fixated on all of the stuff you had to say. That was one of the richest amounts of information on a topic like this we've had on a webinar. So
that's great.
Let's see, is Will coming on back?
The video.
All right.
Yeah, it's all mine too, down at the bottom left.
Let's see. Well, while we're waiting for there it is. All right.
I'm here.
Well, let's see. So we did have quite a few questions rolling in towards the end there. And we want to just sort of roll through them in order. Armando was asking, is there certification offered online now? And I imagine he means like the actual process of complying with completing the certification. Right.
Yeah, so I kind of touched it at the very end there. If you are interested in taking training and becoming formally recognized as a roofing contractor or a fortified professional, we do have courses on there for both hurricane and high wind. They are different. They are different courses, but you can take those. There are some prerequisites. If you're a roofer, you got to demonstrate that you're in the roofing trade and that you've had some experience in roofing, because we don't teach you how to be a roofer. We teach you how to add fortified to your skill set. And professional, you can be from a variety of different disciplines. Evaluators, a little bit narrower band there. That's primarily for building designers, home inspectors, general contractors, folks that have in-depth knowledge of the construction trades are who are looking for on the evaluator side. So yeah, those are available.
Okay.
And they're priced. Those courses are priced anywhere from $100 for 2.5 hours of instruction to about $650 for 8 hours of instruction.
Okay. Now, Will, I saw a couple of people. I saw you were answering some of the questions in the chat. Some of the people were asking about the incentives and, how do you sell this to customers, and what's been your experience with that?
Yeah, so I think it's twofold on that. I think the start with as a builder, especially like what we're doing specifically in the new construction market, we talk about the ability to keep houses, I guess, dry through construction. And we touched on that briefly, I think, in Fred's presentation. So that's where it starts with us. We talk about using a sealed roof deck, and that's the thing that we are able to educate clients on, about being able to be in the dry faster through construction. So that's always the beginning. And yes, there is a cost associated with that. Can also be a cost savings in terms of construction schedule. So that is something that you can weigh when you're considering this. But then ultimately, when you talk about, including the full fortified certification, being able to, save that 20-25% on your homeowner's insurance for just the first standard. And Fred, you can correct me on that, but I think it's up to 30 with gold, but just the fortified roof, we're like 25% in Alabama. So, you talk about a $3,000 or $4,000 a year homeowners policy, an annual premium, especially on some of the lake projects we're doing, saving 20% on that is significant. And so it doesn't, especially on somebody that's not going to sell it as a spec house. These guys are investing in their family's home long term. It's an easy payoff. It's just like convincing a client to upgrade their air conditioner or their insulation package. Once you educate them, they're typically very much interested in I guess investing in that for their house. So hopefully that answers that one. But it's you just got to educate yourself as a builder or contractor, and then you can talk to your clients about it, and they'll be very interested too.
Right. And Fred, as far as the insurance incentives go, people were asking about that a little bit. I mean, would you say just ask your existing insurance company? I mean, do you know how widespread these kinds of savings are?
Yeah, so it's a good question, and I've got job security for a while because I got a long way to go to make sure that these incentives are available for everybody. But there are a growing number. So I mentioned the ones where there are state mandates or some sort of regulatory requirement for folks. So Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Oklahoma, and North Carolina. There are states like Georgia and South Carolina and Texas that are coming along as well. And there are carriers that write in multiple states, and they carry their wind mitigation incentives over from one state to the other. So the first thing to ask is, ask your agent to talk with the underwriters if they don't know, and ask them, what incentives do you have for wind mitigation? And if you're in a place like the Midwest or Great Plains, ask them what incentives they have also for hail. And then knowing that Fortified will meet or exceed the requirements for any of those incentives is a good place to start.
All right, great. Now, Will, I saw you also answered another question about someone was asking about what if they're not happy with their Fortified evaluator. Can you,
Sure.
other than just answering that, can you just kind of expand on what the process was like from the builder's side?
Yeah, I can. I hope I answered that to some extent. Maybe there was some confusion there on if an evaluator is, they are third parties. I think Fred touched that too. But so if you're not happy with the response or the price or something along the way, you are more than welcome to find another evaluator that'll meet your needs. But I think the cost of it is also something that was asked several times in the chat. And I think that, I think Fred, that's about the best way you can say it. It's going to be very comparable to just a normal home inspection for a real estate transaction. I think that's fair. I know in my area for fortified roof, you're somewhere in that 450 to 650 range. It's not abnormal for us to pay an evaluator. And they're going to reach out to you there you're going to reach out to them first, but then they're going to send you some checkpoints to make sure that you have documented to start the process. They're going to schedule a site visit to come out. They'll either come during, like for the roof, they're either going to come out while the decking's going down or soon thereafterward. And we document it, after working with them on a few jobs, we realized, they want a series of pictures. And so you'll get I guess, very familiar with what to document when your framers are installing the decking. And as far as the ring shank nails specifically and the underside of the decking, you want to make sure that happens before you insulate it if you're spray foaming here in our southern climate. So it's really not a big process. You just have to call early and give them the information on the house. They're going to ask you for the address. They're going to ask you for maybe the house plans even. They're going to want to figure out where you're being billed and I guess the wind rating for that specific job. But it's really not a big process. I think once you do your first one, you'll be very familiar with it. Now, I will say we have not gone forward with Fortified Gold yet. I have a plan for one next year, but it's going to be a similar process, though. I would just think that, Fred, you can probably help me on this one, but I would imagine that just starting early, for Fortified roof, you can probably start a little later in the game and still pull it off. But Fortified Gold, you're basically talking about engineering, have an engineered stamp on the whole plan for all the tie downs and everything. So you're going to want to have a more time appropriate approach to that one. So don't be the builder that waits last minute for some of these things. Give yourself some time, especially on your first one.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head there. No pun intended there, Will. But the sooner that you start communicating what you want to accomplish with their design team, if you're a design build firm, or even if you're a high volume firm, figuring out what you want to do and then making sure that those points get incorporated in the plan is the best pathway to success. Because now everybody has a resource to refer to. What do I got to do on this project? There are some compliance forms that get signed off by the engineer and by the installing contractor for things like metal connectors and stuff like that. And site visits. There's more site visits for a new construction home, typically it's at dry in of the roof, close in. So right after you insulate, right before you hang drywall, and then closer to final. You can get it done in 3 visits. Most folks use 4, but that's typically what that looks like. And back to the earlier point, I sort of smiled a little bit when somebody said, what happens if you're not happy with your evaluator? You can make a change. You are not locked into an evaluator. You have a contract directly with that evaluator. And if you're not happy with the services that they're performing, you are free to move to another evaluator if you so choose. And we are always recruiting more. So if we don't have a lot of choices currently where you are building, then, reach out to us. And if you know somebody who's already providing energy rating services, or somebody who's I know that this is kind of talking out of school a little bit, but if you know somebody who's a home inspector you can get along with. When I was a builder, it wasn't necessarily a relationship I cherished, but if you have a home inspector you can get along with, we can help bring them along and get them squared away and have them certified. So you have somebody else that you may have a working relationship already with. So we're happy to help with that.
Okay, great. Before we jump to the next question, I just want to remind people, Kelly from Fine Homebuilding put a link in the chat for another Fortified video that we produced a little while ago that goes into detail about the what you have to do for the fortified roof system.
And before you go off of that, Rob, let me just say too, while I didn't spend a ton of time showing it in the webinar, we have a website called fortifiedhome.org. On that, if you click on professional resources, you'll go to the technical page, and there is the standard. There are checklists. There are standard detailed drawings you can give to your design team to incorporate in your plans. There's a whole set of technical bulletins, and everything there is available for free. And furthermore, if you want to market it, we have another page that has marketing resources, so flyers and sample social media posts, things like that. And a logo use guidelines document, so that if you want to use our branding once you become certified, you can do that. So there's a whole host of free resources up there for you.
Thanks, Fred. Will, so have you used a different systems for the roof, or do you kind of have a standard set of details that you work with?
So before we were doing the actual fortified certification, we were already using primarily the complete zip roof. Yeah, that was something, obviously we started with the wall assemblies when we started using zip panels, but then we moved to using roof panels as well. Our home started, I guess there was more of a need for us to start having, we had longer framing times, I guess. And so getting in the dry earlier was important for us. So we were already using that, the sealed roof deck, which is probably the easiest way to achieve the sealed roof deck. I feel like it's a product like Zip System. We were already doing that, and then obviously even the ring shank nails, that was already our normal thing. So that was not a big change for us. It was just documenting it and just making sure that the nail pattern met the standard. And then we talked about drip edge. We were already using drip edge. You have to just pay attention to the thickness of it and the nail pattern there. So really not much change for us in that technique, just paying a little more attention to that. I mean, it really wasn't much for us to get into. Now, if you're there, I've seen roof systems in my market being installed that they're going to have a lot to change. I mean, I think some of these comments I was watching, I mean, I think people would agree with us. There's certainly, I guess, the low cost roofing contractors that have been installing things that in order for them to get on board to meet the standard, they are going to have to change a lot. But I think, my goodness, the sealed roof deck is just such an important detail. I don't want to get down a big rabbit hole here, but my previous life or career, I was in the fire service. We did lots of tornado type relief work in areas of Alabama that got hit, which was pretty frequent. And it was amazing going through neighborhoods where we would have just tons of roofs being ripped off, and the water damage would just be pounding these houses. then what happens in devastation areas like that is that roofing contractors are so behind, they can't get there. They can't get there to tarp your house. So you end up with so much more damage, not just during the storm, but even the day after and the day after that, and the day after that, before contractors can get caught up with tarping houses. So there's just, I mean, it's such an important thing. And somebody just asked me here about, I guess, the longer framing times. And so, what I mean by that for us is we went from a, 3 to 5 week framing to, it may take us 8 to 12 weeks to frame a house, or even more, depending on the size. And so just a longer, that's what we were referring to there. It just gives us protection, and basically you're in the dry as soon as you frame your house. So that's the reason. The other big point of a sealed roof deck, you don't have to rush to get your roof on. So
yeah, that's a good point you were saying about you don't think about the fact that if everybody in your neighborhood has damage, you're obviously not getting that house closed up really quickly afterwards. So it's not even just the damage from the day or day after the storm.
Yeah, and one other thing to think about, because I go out a lot after these storms and I'm in these markets and watching homeowners try to recover. If you've got limited damage, you can afford to wait until the quality contractors are available. A lot of times we'll have folks that will come into these markets after the storm that aren't necessarily local and maybe don't have a ton of experience in the trade that they're purporting to do. So there's a term for that. It's called storm chasers, right? They come into the market and they just concentrate on getting roofs on as fast as they can, and they don't pay a whole lot of attention to the details. So if you've already kept the water out and you can be patient, you can wait for the contractor of your choice to get to you and put that roof back together, because you're able to stay inside and not have to worry about getting just a dry cover over your head. So keep that in mind. It can pay dividends. And the person who asked about selling this before, that's part of the benefit package of going with something like Fortified. You're going the extra mile to put them in a situation where they are far less likely that they're going to have to deal with that really, really bad day. They may have some damage to fix, but it's not going to be as bad as it could be, for sure.
Sure. We had someone ask about what sort of construction details are we talking about when we get into the higher standards, particularly the gold, when you're talking about framing connections?
Yeah, so let's just start with silver real quick. Now I'll quickly get to load, path, and gold. So for silver, we are looking at a couple of sets of connections. We're looking at gable end bracing. So if you have gable shaped roofs, with the triangles, those are particularly vulnerable to high wind, especially if they're platform framed, which means you have a truss that sits on top of a wall. That connection point acts as a hinge. So we have some requirements. We have some details for letting in bracing for that. And typically, if you're getting a manufactured truss, your truss designer will include somewhere in your truss packet a bracing detail. I don't see a lot of builders who get that far back in the truss packet to come across it, let alone install it. But we do require the gable end bracing is installed, and there's a variety of ways you can do that. You can even add it after the fact if you have some access. The other detail that we focus on is porches and carports. So how the porch is attached to a beam, the beam is attached to the posts, and the post is attached to the foundation are critical connections so that the porch doesn't come off and damage the house. So those are some of the connections that we're looking at. And then for a load path, there's a number of ways you can transfer that load. Very popular these days are Simpson or Mytech connectors. You can use a strap or a clip at the roof framing member to the wall, then metal connectors through the wall, and then bolts or straps or embedded anchors down at the bottom plate. The engineer can help you specify that because each one of those connectors has a certain amount of load that it can take. And your house has some specific loads based on its size and location. So an engineer can really help you with that. There are some places where you can still use things like the sheathing to pass the load from the top plate to the bottom plate. There, if you're in a location where that's possible, you're just basically talking about increasing the number of nails you got in there. There's a lot of ways you can get there. We provide the guidance on what needs to be accomplished, but the design professional can help design an affordable and cost-effective way of getting there.
Okay. I'll ask Will about this first, but it might be something, Fred, you need to dig into deeper. But people were asking about specific additional details or structures, such as exterior insulation or solar panels. Like, Will, I'm sure must have solar panels on some of the houses that you work on, right? Have you had?
Yeah, so I would say those are good questions. Interestingly enough, no, solar panels are not in our market really. There's just
cheaper electricity down there.
Yeah, we love our 15 cent a kilowatt hour energy here. TVA is pretty good to us, but I know obviously on the East Coast we have lots of builders that are installing solar arrays, and I'm not that familiar with those and how they relate to fortified, Fred. I would assume that there's definitely something to be said there, but it's like, as long as the roof meets the standard first before you install them, I would think that's a great place to start. But Fred, you could, exterior, there's even people asking about roof insulation and panels and that kind of thing that we could probably talk on too. So when we get past the solar one.
Yeah, so no problem. So both of those things have similar approaches to making sure that you're making good decisions on how to install them to be wind resistant. So when it comes to solar, we do have some guidance in the standard around solar panels. Basically, you're looking for an engineered system. The system needs to be designed to resist the design pressures in your market. And what that will do is that will tell you how that system needs to be fastened to that specific roof, right? And so that's really important. What are the fasteners sizes? What is the spacing of those fasteners? The other thing that becomes critical, and this is more of a just a general observation than a hard and fast requirement for fortified, is anytime you're penetrating the roof system, now you've got something you've got to flash or you've got to seal. And so it's really important to make sure that the contractor that you're using is paying attention to those details. And so whenever I advise people when they're talking about having solar done, I make sure to tell them, hey, talk to your contractor and ask them, how do you flash your system? How do you seal roof penetrations? Because that'll tell you a lot. If they just kind of give you some broad answer and they don't get very specific about it, it's a good bet that they're not paying attention to a lot of the intricate details that are associated there. But if they get into pretty significant detail, that they're paying attention. Now I did say one of the ways that somebody could potentially fall out of the fortified program after an initial designation is if they add solar after the roof is designated. You can still do that. But what we encourage people to do is have the evaluator come out and document that solar install so that when it comes time to redesignate, we have documentation that says, hey, the solar array was installed in compliance with the standard. When it comes to roofing materials that include things like exterior foam, whether you're on a steep pitch or a low pitch roof, and Will says he's got some experience with this, so I'll keep my remarks brief. But if you are buying a system that has been tested to resist wind, which you should be on the lookout for, and this is something that's not commonly done inland. You don't get a lot of people questioning or asking you, what is the wind rating of your roof cover? But if you are choosing a system, look for ones that are tested. And typically what they'll do is they'll have a tested installation over foam or over purlins on top of foam. And if you follow those installation instructions, you're going to get where you want to be. But it's really hard to do it if you're not using one of those tested systems, because there's a lot of details to pay attention to.
Okay. Yeah, that the only I'll add to that too with the metal roof specific products. We've ran into that with a couple of our projects, and so if you're using a local like standard seam metal supplier that actually comes out and rolls it on site for you and cuts them to length, that kind of thing, you may struggle because some of those companies have not done the needed testing to meet the standard. Now, again, check with them locally, and the folks here at Fortified are going to be, they'll be great assets when you start talking to these companies, because they may or may not know what you're even asking for, the pressure rating and all for that. But I will say that your major metal shingle suppliers, like we have a job coming up with Edco, and they're a metal shingle supplier. Now, interestingly enough, and Fred, I don't know if I've even told you this, but they meet the more of the, I guess it's the inland, so not the high velocity hurricane zone. They do not meet that. But where we live in North Alabama, it actually meets that. So you just really have to look at these. I think the metal panels, whether they're shingles or the actual full length panels, to see what they're testing. It's easy to do with shingles. Most major shingle manufacturers, you're not going to have a trouble meeting the standard. But the metal roofs seem to be the tricky part, because I think there's so many people making them, and you just have to dig into it as a builder or contractor and make sure before you get too far in the process that covering will meet the standard. And you can help me here too, Fred. I know somebody was asking about exterior insulation and siding, and to my knowledge, that is currently not part of fortified standard when it comes to everything past the WRB in your wall assembly.
Yeah. So
really past the studs.
Yeah. So on the metal roof, right, you're right, Will. I mean, and it's interesting too, I live in a fortified home that I built for myself and my family 5-6 years ago. I have a metal roof on it. And my metal was built or bent right here on site and cut to length and all that kind of good stuff. But here in Florida, there's a process already as part of the state inspection process that you have to have a notice of compliance or a notice of acceptance for that product. Now, one of the things that some folks don't know is that if you buy a metal forming machine from somebody like Englert or something like that, a lot of times the machine actually is what gets tested and rated. And so anybody who is qualified to run that machine can produce win rated panels. But again, if the code enforcement hasn't asked you for it, then the roofing contractor may not even know what you're talking about. And we're super happy to get involved and help explain that. I got a guy with 40 years of roofing experience on my team. We can look at product documentation, and that Edco stuff came to me, and in 5 minutes I was able to look at it and confirm where it can and cannot be used and all that kind of good stuff. So, we're happy to be a resource when it comes to wall siding and wall insulation. The one part where that does come into play is in the gold standard, particularly in the hurricane zone. We require sheathing to be impact resistant, meaning impact resistant, similar to a 7/16 piece of wood sheathing material. And so what that means is you got to have the sheathing on the outside of the insulation. So the insulation goes against the stud, the sheathing goes on to the outside, and then you have to get longer fasteners so you can get into the structure with enough embedment to hold it on there. So that's one place where fortified does come into play when it comes to moving that brake, the energy brake, to the outside face of the stud. The other thing I'll say though is we have done some testing with exterior mounted foam, particularly foam sheathing, because of the energy codes moving in that direction. And there's some challenges there with that stuff holding up to the loads that are applied to it. So you got to be cautious about that. Think really hard about what you're planning to use there.
Okay. Well, guys, we're getting a little bit after 5. I think I want to answer maybe one more question. I mean, I think we could probably go on forever, but one thing you pointed out, Fred, is that you've got tons of information on the website, and that you've got people willing to answer questions. What's the best way for people, just to remind everyone, what's the best way for people to learn about this and to get the information that they need?
Yeah, the best place to start is to go to fortifiedhome.org and just check out the professional resources that we have there. Get a copy of the standard, read through it, get a copy of the documentation checklist, read through it. Somebody asked, do you have standard detailed drawings? We do. We have them in a variety of formats: PDF, DWF. We've got them in Revit, I think. So there's a bunch of them up there that can be used and given to design professionals. Once you start there, if you want to go further, then we have a link on our website to the training platform, the fortifiedwise.com. You click over there and you can check out the courses that we have available there. And somebody asked also, if I get certified or if I'm looking for a contractor, how do I find one? We have a free online directory of service providers. So once you become certified, you are added to that directory and you become searchable. So it becomes a lead generator for you. And if you're looking for a contractor or an evaluator in your market, you can go there and you can look. We have a couple of national folks that cover the entire United States. So if you're looking someplace and you don't see somebody in your immediate area, we do have a company or two on there called, one is called Pilot, that has a national footprint. So that's a good place to get started. But fortifiedhome.org will get you there. We got a lot of good testimonials and videos like you saw from the lab too, up there.
Okay. And then if people have very specific, so there's going to be questions that we haven't answered today about specific details or types of homes or what that is are there people, is there a means for people to ask those sorts of specific questions directly to anyone?
Yeah, so when you go to the website, if you have questions, there's a contact us link, and if you submit a question through the contact us link, it goes into our tracking system, and then we figure out which is on our team is the best person to answer that question, and we route it to them, and then they respond back. Once you are participating in the program, lots of times you get even more access. For example, Mark, our roofing specialist. Mark can lots of times will give out his cell phone number and be on call for people that have questions. So we really, I didn't get a chance to say this, and I know we're at the end here, but as a nonprofit, Fortified is not a profit center for IBHS. The most I make on any given house is $70. That's all I make on each house. So our mission is to get this information to the people that can do something with it and to be as big a resource as we can possibly be for the building community. So, we're here to answer questions and help any way we can.
Great. Thanks, Fred. And Will, do you have any kind of closing remarks on your experience with the program?
Yeah, I would just encourage anybody out there that hasn't taken the plunge yet to go forward in the Fortified standard, to just take that few minutes, read about it on fortifiedhome.org and contact an evaluator and get started. And don't be scared to sell it to your customer. Once you explain it to them, or just send them the website, let them watch the videos and the testimonials and let it sell itself. It's really, our mission as builders here really should just be a better house, building a better house than we did yesterday. And there's no better way to do it than incorporating Fortified into your building process. And and you have to think about just really giving your clients a better house in the event of severe weather. It's something that maybe you hadn't thought about as a builder, and it's something that you can really start delivering to your clients and just to elevate what you're doing. So just don't be scared to reach out, ask any of us questions. We'll all be glad to help you and take that step.
Great. Thanks, Will. One last tiny little question before we go, Fred. Someone asked a couple of times, is this just a US program, or does Canada participate in anything related to Fortified?
Yeah, so we don't offer designations in Canada or any of the nearshore islands like Bahamas, Bermuda, Puerto Rico. We get some questions from those folks every once in a while. But the standards can be used anywhere. So if you want to download our checklist and download our standards, we've talked with some of the organizations that are similar to what we do in Canada, and so a lot of the mitigation stuff that we talk about applies up there, but we just don't offer designations there. So you feel free to use the material, but we won't be offering designations up that way.
And I would imagine that insurance companies they could still talk to their insurance companies about the systems that they have in their house, and maybe they might be able to get some kind of breaks. I don't know. That's the more knowledgeable you are, that you can talk about wind mitigation and you can talk about how you've lowered your risk, then that can lead to a very productive conversation. And so yeah, I agree with you that the more information you have, the more opportunities you have to
negotiate a better price.
Great. Well, thank you, guys. This has been a very informative webinar, and I'll just encourage everyone who's still watching to go to fortifiedhome.org to find out more information. Obviously, we didn't get to answer every single question, and as Fred pointed out, there are people who can answer whatever question you've got there. And again, thank you to Zip System Roof Assembly for sponsoring tonight's presentation, and thank you, Fred and Will, for all the great information you've shared with everyone.
Thanks for having us,
Thank you.
Rob. Good to see you, Will.
Yeah, good times. Take care, guys.
All right.
Good
Have a
night.
good evening. Bye now.